to keep yourself on mute and keep your video off if you're not presenting or speaking. So welcome to our 5th and final Vernal Poolooza session of 2021. Thanks for tuning in with us, whether today's your first time or if you've been with us since February or even attended the in-person virtual Vernal Poolooza in 2021. We would like to mention that we plan on holding an in-person conference in 2022. And if you're interested in speaking, you can reach out to Mark at ohiowetlands.org. We're currently calling for speakers. And if you're interested in attending, keep an eye on our OWA Facebook page or the OWA website for registration information, probably coming out November or December this year. And that will take place in March of 2022. And so like previous sessions, today's talk will run for about 45 minutes. We'll have time for questions immediately after, and then we'll share some field vernal pool footage with you from 3 local vernal pool sites in Ohio. Feel free to use the chat box to make comments or write questions as they come to mind. And if you missed previous sessions, you can check those out on the OWA YouTube channel as well. And so today we're excited to announce that we have Thomas Biebighauser here with us. He's an author and restoration expert of vernal pools who has created or restored over 2,500 wetlands. Tom is the owner and operator of Wetland Restoration and Training, LLC, and you can check out his website. And he's also the author to a guide to creating vernal pools, wetland restoration, drainage, and repair, and wetland restoration construction, a technical guide. In 2022, he will be serving as our keynote speaker at Vernal Poolooza, and he'll also lead an optional field trip where he'll do vernal pool design and construction workshop. You won't want to miss it. With that, I will stop sharing my screen and welcome Thomas Biebighauser. Thanks so much for being with us, Thomas.
It's great to be here. Okay, let's see. It's saying that I'm not able to start my video because the host has stopped it.
Okay, let's see. Dale, is that something you need to allow?
Okay, looks like we're up. It's great to be with you today. I'm going to see if I can share my screen, and then we're in business. Okay, let's see. All right. Are we able to see the image on the screen?
Yes, you can just share presentation mode. There you go. Perfect.
Okay, it's showing up. Great. Okay, let's start in. The vernal pool that you're looking at on the screen here, we built it at McBrayer Elementary School in Moorhead, Kentucky, back in 2005. And this ephemeral wetland, we built it from soils that were high in clay. It only took us 4 hours to build it using a dozer. And this wetland fills with water in the spring and it dries in the fall. Now, vernal pools are wetlands that contain water for part of the year. They generally fill with water in the spring and often dry in late summer or fall. And the photos you see of this is a vernal pool is one that we built on the Danube National Forest in Kentucky back in 2006. And this one is supplied primarily with groundwater. So as the elevation of groundwater raises and lowers, that changes the presence and absence of water in the wetland. Vernal pools generally don't support fish because they go dry. And this is of critical importance to the survival of many of the amphibians that we're working to manage for the lack of fish in the wetlands. The American bullfrog is generally not able to breed in vernal pools that dry each year because its tadpoles require 2 years to develop. Now, individuals are building vernal pools across North America, and we're doing this to provide habitat for diversity of animals and plants. And in this presentation, we're going to focus on vernal pools that are being built for rare species of amphibians. The vernal pool that you see in this photo was built on the Danube National Forest in Kentucky in 2008, and it does have a wet and a dry cycle. The eastern spadefoot can only be found breeding in one small pond on the state of Rhode Island. The University of Rhode Island's Dr. Nancy Carricker, Dr. Bill Buffum, and Scott Buchanan with the Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management, they've been monitoring this single population of the spadefoot with great concern. In 2019, I joined their effort to help the eastern spadefoot, and we built 2 vernal pools to provide additional breeding habitat for the eastern spadefoot. And we did this on the nearby Scudder Preserve, owned by the Richmond Rural Land Preservation Trust. And the 2 vernal pools we built were built along the edge of mowed fields, and each was built quite shallow, being deepest with water in the middle. And the white stake you see in the center is for monitoring water depth. And one of these vernal pools we built only 8 inches deep in the center. The other one we built 6 inches deep in the center. Many students from the University of Rhode Island helped us with the construction of these vernal pools. And here they are placing an aquatic safe liner in the basin. And we're going to protect this liner on both sides with thick layers of geotextile fabric and also with soil. This photo shows an aquatic safe liner that's protected on both sides by thick geotextile fabric. And this is ready for covering with soil. Here the excavator is spreading soil over the liner, and the heavy equipment is not allowed on the liner during construction or after construction. And this is to make sure that we don't tear the liner during construction. Here, students and volunteers are using shovels and rakes, and they're helping us to place at least 6 inches of soil over the liner. And the thickness of soil that we place over the liner, we continually monitor it and measure it to make sure that there are no thin spots. And here's a group of volunteers that helped us build one of the wetlands. The scrap of liner that you see them holding in the center, it was signed and dated by everyone. And then we buried it under the new wetland to serve as a time capsule for when the wetland was built. This shows one of the vernal pools we built in Rhode Island after a heavy rain event. The larvae of the eastern spadefoot have been released in the 2 new vernal pools, and this dedicated group built 2 more vernal pools this spring on the Bittersweet Farm in Rhode Island. So we built those in April of 2021. Mike Hazlett has been restoring vernal pools in the state of Virginia since 2008. And you're looking at one of the vernal pools that he restored. Nice looking wetland. Here's a photo of Mike at one of the vernal pool restoration sites. Now in 2014, Mike restored 2 vernal pools in Old Colchester Park and Preserve in Fairfax County, Virginia. The drained vernal pools were part of a restoration project as the park was ditched extensively during the farming era. And it's something, even though the trees are growing here, the ditches were dug over 100 years ago, the ditches are still draining the wetlands. And Mike had mapped over 1,500 linear feet of ditches in this park. The red arrow shows one of the ditches that he filled to restore this vernal pool. And he also did an experiment to try to lengthen the hydro periods in these vernal pools. And this experiment involved girdling the red maple trees. And Mike, as well as myself, have found it really difficult to kill red maples using the girdling technique. But this is really, in effect, a good way to respond to the drought effects of climate change, seeing if we can get these vernal pools to hold water a little bit longer. Now, a number of the vernal pools that in Virginia were drained by farmers using these clay tiles that were buried deep in the ground. Now, when Mike visited this vernal pool on March 16th, 2021, he spotted 75 spotted salamander egg masses and several small aggregations of wood frog eggs. And Mike told me it's getting excellent use by a diversity of target amphibians, which is really good news. Here's another photo of Mike, and he's at one of the many vernal pools that he's helped to build and restore. Now, in 2016, the only breeding population of the northern leopard frog in the province of British Columbia was in one wetland. And this wetland was in the Creston Valley Wildlife Management Area near the town of Creston on the border with the state of Idaho. Marc-Andre Boucher, manager of the Creston Valley Wildlife Management Area, he took the lead in organizing a team to design and to restore ephemeral wetlands so they would provide additional breeding habitat for the northern leopard frog. The team that worked with Marc-Andre Boucher, we all realized that there was a great need to build wetlands that would dry in the fall so that would discourage colonization by the non-native American bullfrog and by the non-native bass and sunfish, all which were preying on the northern leopard frog. Now, the field work we did on the Creston Valley Wildlife Area, we found that many of the natural ephemeral wetlands that had once supported amphibians in the valley had been drained. And many of these wetlands have been drained by Ducks Unlimited Canada when large impoundments were built on the sites in the 1960s and 70s and 80s. And this photo shows one of many ditches dug to drain the impoundments as part of construction. And this ditch drained a large natural ephemeral wetland. And these wetlands were located along the Kootenai River. And the northern leopard frog was once common in these areas. You may recognize this grass as reed canary grass. And tall and dense stands of reed canary grass are now growing in the natural wetlands that have been drained using ditches in this Creston Valley. And reed canary grass is a non-native species, and it dominates drained wetlands. And its presence provides strong indication that a wetland was drained on the site, oftentimes a vernal pond. It's interesting, here we're doing all this work in reed canary grass in Canada, but it's unlikely that a project like this would ever take place in the United States. And the reason for that is because most agencies in the US would consider a drained wetland that is now growing reed canary grass to be a jurisdictional wetland that would be protected under the Clean Water Act. Now, here's one of the few remaining natural ephemeral wetlands in the Creston Valley in British Columbia. And this one's located in the Yakanuki Lower Kootenai Band Reserve. And when you look at this wetland, you'll notice on the higher ground surrounding the basin, you see willows growing. And these came in all different sizes, and there are so few left because the area was drained for farming and for impoundment construction. Ephemeral wetlands or vernal pools, like the one we see here in this photo, were once common along the Kootenai River near Creston. And the majority were either drained for farming or they're converted to deep water impoundments that now contain non-native bass, sunfish, and the American bullfrog. Now, it was a challenge determining how deep to build the basins for the wetlands we are restoring on the Creston Valley Wildlife Area. We wanted these wetlands to hold water long enough for the northern leopard frog larvae to develop, yet we wanted them to go dry in the fall so that they wouldn't support fish or the non-native American bullfrog. So in order to do this, we measured groundwater depths, we measured the depths of existing ponds, and we sampled soil textures in the valley near where the project was planned to take place. The map you're looking at shows 6 ephemeral wetlands we built on the Creston Valley Wildlife Management Area in the year 2016. Now, we built these wetlands for the northern leopard frog after the species entered hibernation during the month of November. And it was necessary for us to use low ground pressure heavy equipment. This equipment had wide tracks, and this was done to avoid getting stuck in the saturated soils where the wetlands were being built. Now, you're looking at a drained wetland in this photo, and you're looking where a dozer with low ground pressure crossed it and didn't even disturb the soil. And this area is dominated by reed canary grass. And if you look in the upper right, you'll see where we built an ephemeral wetland a few days earlier. The wetlands we built were old fields that were dominated by reed canary grass, and we were building these on the edges of areas that were dominated by cattails. Now, we use logs as portable rafts to keep the excavators from sinking. You know, here the excavator places the logs in front of the machine, and it will crawl up over the top of these logs and start digging. And the logs are all similar in diameter and similar in length, and this helps prevent the excavator from sliding off the logs when it's digging. Now, this technique we find works much better than wood mats and allows you to go into areas of saturated soils and not to damage vegetation, but more importantly, not to get stuck with heavy equipment. The logs prevented the excavator from becoming stuck in the mud, and the logs averaged 20 inches in diameter and were 20 feet long. Now, we cut these logs from live trees, not dead trees, so they would not break. Here's Ted Crane standing on some of the logs. This guy builds great looking ephemeral wetlands. And these logs provided excellent flotation. If Ted were to step off one of these logs, he would sink up to his waist in mud and the machine would be hopelessly stuck. Now here the excavator is shaping a shallow bay in a wetland as the dozer is used to move soil away from the excavator. And you'll notice the pink colored ribbons, those were used to mark the perimeter of the wetland being built. We've developed techniques for building these wetlands that are low cost and really efficient and really involve very low cost engineering. Here, the dozer operator, this machine has wide tracks, low ground pressure. It's moving soil away from the excavators. And in this photo, you'll see a lot going on. There are 2 excavators that are working to build the wetland on saturated soils. And each of the excavators is perched on logs so it won't get stuck. The small excavator is digging the wetland and depositing its soil near the large excavator. That large excavator is also digging the wetland and moving its soil in front of the dozer. The dozer then removes the soil and spreads it at a distance from the excavators. And if you look in the foreground, you'll see the ice. That was a portion of the wetland we built the day before. Now here the dozer pushes the soil away from the excavator. Now in building these wetlands on saturated soils, it's important that the dozer does no digging. If the dozer operator tried to dig, it would become hopelessly stuck. So the dozer simply pushes the soil that the excavator removes, and it stays on top of the unbroken reed canary grass. And that way it doesn't get stuck. This portion of the vernal pond was dug the day before the photo was taken. And here the wetland is beginning to fill with groundwater. Here the dozer is shaping the piles of soil that were removed from digging the wetland. We allowed the soil to freeze overnight, so it would be possible to shape it the next day. Now, I said we allowed it to freeze overnight. What really happened, it was such mud that the dozer was likely to get stuck in it. So if the soil froze, we were able to push it and shape it the next day. Now, in building a wetland on saturated soils, you'll need an area of land equal in size to the wetland being built to spread your soil. Think of removing a pie from a pie tin. You need just as much space to remove that pie on the counter than it occupies in the pan or the wetland you're building. So you'll notice in the background that, well, in the foreground, we have the soil that was spread from building the wetland. But in the background, we have the new wetland that's now covered with snow. And if you look closely, you'll see a mound that we built in the center of the new wetland. We wanted this to resemble a beaver lodge. And in the far background, there's heavy equipment that's building another vernal pool. We placed large woody debris in the restored wetlands to provide basking sites for the western painted turtle, a species at risk. And also we placed an abundance of branches and slash in the wetlands to provide hiding places for the northern leopard frog. Now this restored vernal pool is filled with water in the spring. And you'll see something in this photo that you don't normally see in the wetlands that I helped build. The logs have been placed and the ends are not broken off. These were the logs that we were using for flotation. And when we finished building this wetland, we used the logs as large woody debris. Nowadays, we would break off the ends of those logs so that it would look more natural and we wouldn't have cut surfaces. Now, there's a diversity of aquatic plants growing in every one of these new ephemeral wetlands. And here you're looking at one of the restored wetlands, the first spring after construction. The plants are coming in that quickly. Look at the basin of this wetland, this vernal pool. This is one that we built, and each one that we built it so it have a different hydro period, different water depths in the middle. And notice how the bottom is quite irregular. So there are many ridges and mounds and peninsulas and points. The wetlands now dry at different times of the year because they're all built different depths. The basins, we built them with numerous pits and mounds, and that increased plant diversity. And it prevents any one species of plant, such as cattails and reed canary grass, from taking over. And we're making the basins of these wetlands really rough. We're finding that it gives our amphibians plenty of places to burrow in and hide. Now, this ephemeral early was built to contain very shallow water. Now, in a wet year, this may be the only wetland that dries in the fall. So when building vernal pools for amphibians and other species, I recommend that instead of building one, you build a series of them and make them all different depths, shapes, and sizes, so that if you have a wet year, at least one will dry in the fall. And if you have very dry years, at least one will contain water long enough for the amphibians to develop. Now, in building these vernal pools, we find that in their dry cycle, they often provide habitat for quite a diversity of flowering plants. And this is fantastic when helping pollinators. And the bidens you see growing in this vernal pool, unbelievable, the activity from bees. I mean, it was almost deafening to be out at this site and listen to all the bees. You may recognize these tracks as from the grizzly bear. We're finding that these wetlands we're building for the northern leopard frog near Creston, British Columbia. They're being used by western painted turtles, but one of the greatest users is the grizzly bear, which is quite a rare species, and they feed on many of the aquatic plants that are growing in these ephemeral wetlands. We've since restored over 70 ephemeral wetlands in the Creston Valley, on the Creston Valley Wildlife Management Area, and on the neighboring Yakanuki Lower Kootenai Band Reserve in the past 3 years. And this year we're planning to restore another 50 ephemeral wetlands for the northern leopard frog and for the western painted turtle. Okay, let's go to Pennsylvania. Kings Gap State Park is located in south central Pennsylvania, near the community of Carlisle. Maybe you've been there. One of the attractions is Kings Gap State Park is the neighboring Nature Conservancy lands. This sign describes the importance of vernal pools to breeding wood frogs, spotted salamanders, marble salamanders, and crustaceans at the Forest Pools Preserve at Kings Gap State Park. They have wonderful trails at Kings Gap, and the interpretive signs will guide you to the vernal pools so that you can explore them. But unfortunately, until the year 2010, visitors rarely saw water in these vernal pools. You'd have to go out there after a flood to see a small pool of water in one of these natural wetlands. Runoff that was entering these vernal ponds prior to 2010 quickly soaked into the ground, and this was stranding all the animals that were trying to breed in the shallow water. Now, no one could determine exactly why these vernal pools no longer functioned the way they did historically. The testing that I helped to complete, it indicated that wetlands had largely been supplied with groundwater, and the elevation of the water table in the area had been lowered. And this is interesting to come up with this, but there are some tips that these were groundwater supplied wetlands. Look at all the rocks in the basin. If these were surface water wetlands that were supported on clay soils, you would not see the rock. But the presence of rock indicates that these were groundwater supplied wetlands and that something had happened to the water table. And we think it may have been development in the valley where large amounts of water were being removed by residences. Dedicated volunteers and agency personnel helped us examine 7 of the vernal pools in the year 2009. And we looked to identify what actions we could take so that they once again could support vernal pool plants and animal life. And we determined that some of the sites could be improved by simply digging them slightly deeper. Others could be improved by using existing clay soils and compacting this clay soil. And for others, it would be necessary to install aquatic safe liners. Now, construction took place in August 2010. And here you see where leaves in the dry vernal pools, we're removing them by hand prior to construction. And we would later place these in and around the renovated wetlands. We removed mosses by hand prior to digging with heavy equipment, and we also saved these and later placed them around the renovated wetlands. Now, the Upper Susquehanna Coalition, their wetland restoration team provided the heavy equipment and the operators that we used to complete the project. One of our first steps was removing the topsoil from each of the natural vernal pools and stockpiling it so it could be spread in the finished wetlands. Here's Tracy Coleman with the Nature Conservancy. She was on site monitoring the construction of the project and took the lead in gaining approvals for the project to move forward. And here you see the Upper Susquehanna Coalition excavator that's digging the vernal pool deeper in the center. And we're loading the soil onto a tracked dump truck, and that soil will be spread on higher ground away from the vernal pool. Now, this tracked dump truck was really easy to maneuver in the forest, and it didn't leave the deep ruts, and it wasn't likely to get stuck in the soils that were wet near the wetland area. We held several training workshops while the project was taking place, and this way participants can learn of the techniques that we're using to rebuild these natural vernal pools. Following completion of the project, of course, the rains came, and we found that the hydro period in each of these renovated wetlands was greatly lengthened. And some of the techniques were used included compacting clay soils that were in place. Others were digging them deeper in the center to get at that water table. And still others, we installed aquatic safe liners. The project was very successful at returning water to the vernal pools. And it's hard to believe that the vernal pool that you're looking at here in this photo, we were actually able to install 2 aquatic safe liners to repair the site and put everything back together. And the response was really amazing. Well, in a couple of years, you were not able to tell that the vernal pools have been rebuilt. Here's a photo of Kathy King and Mike Bertram, and they've been monitoring these vernal pools since the restoration actions were taken 11 years ago. And they have found wood frogs, spotted salamanders, marbled salamanders, and fairy shrimp successfully breeding in the restored vernal pools. Now, here's one of the vernal pools that's holding water too long now, and we're working now to modify the liner so that it will leak and give us a little bit shorter hydro period. Maybe you recognize this amphibian. Maybe you recognize it as the Chiricahua leopard frog. It's found in Arizona and New Mexico. It's a federally listed threatened species. And we've been building vernal pools to provide habitat for this federally listed species in both states. There are thousands of ranch ponds like the one you see here in Arizona and New Mexico that were dug to provide water for livestock and never held water, thousands of them. Ranchers have tried to repair these, often using bentonite, never with success. I regularly meet with individuals who have spent over $30,000 on bentonite attempting to repair these leaking ranch ponds, and I have yet to meet a rancher that's had success using bentonite. This photo shows what was named the wild duck pond. And this is called a ranch tank or a pond, and it doesn't hold water. And we've been rebuilding failed ranch ponds like this one on the Coronado National Forest in Arizona to provide breeding habitat for the Chiricahua leopard frog. And if you look in the background, you won't really see any pine trees. We won't see any pine trees growing in the area. And what this shows us is that unless you find groundwater, it may be necessary to add water to this wetland from a spring or a well, or it'll be dry most of the year. Here's the wild duck pond as we're rebuilding it into a functioning vernal pond wetland. We're using an excavator to remove the dam on the old pond and to shape a natural looking basin that's deepest in the middle with gradual slopes. And we purchased a 1-piece large aquatic safe liner, and we protected it on both sides with thick 16-ounce geotextile and placed this in the basin. Wildland firefighting crews help us with many of these projects in the West. And here they're helping us by raking soils and by helping us place soil over the liner and geotextile. The excavator and dozer that were used for this project were too small, so we had to do much of the work by hand. We've learned, use a large enough excavator when building one of these vernal pools with a liner. And here we're using a Caterpillar 336. And when you're building a wetland with a liner, and that liner is over 60 foot in diameter, I recommend using larger heavy equipment. The long reach of this machine will allow you to efficiently dig the basin for the wetland and to cover the liner with soil while keeping the heavy equipment off of the liner. You're looking at the wild duck pond 2 years following reconstruction. And the good news is the Chiricahua leopard frog is now breeding at this site. The wild duck pond is filled with water from a spring that's located in the mountains. This is a photo showing the Brown Canyon Ranch Pond, which was also a failed ranch pond that we rebuilt using aquatic safe liner. The Chiricahua leopard frog is also breeding in this ephemeral wetland. And this vernal pool has the unlikely name of the Harkey Tank. And we made this wetland by rebuilding another failed ranch pond using an aquatic safe liner. Here's a typical location for building a vernal pool to provide habitat for the Chiricahua leopard frog in southern Arizona. This site is downhill from a well. The soils are at least 4 foot deep, and there are very few large rocks to contend with, and the slope is less than 6%. So it's a large open area with a slope of less than 6% and has deep soils, but the soils are not clay. So here's the vernal pool we built at this site, and here it is 2 years after construction. And yes, the Chiricahua leopard frog is now breeding in this new wetland. We have found that these aquatic safe liners allow us to build large vernal pools on sites that don't have groundwater and don't have soil textures that are high in clay. The aquatic safe liner technique allows us to construct wetlands for rare species near where there's a source of water from a well or a spring in the southwest. Now here's a small wetland. We built the Southwestern Research Station near Portal, Arizona for the Chiricahua leopard frog. And we built this wetland along with many others without using liners because we were able to find groundwater near the surface. And yes, the Chiricahua leopard frog is breeding in this and the neighboring wetlands. We're also building wetlands in northern Arizona to provide for the northern leopard frog. Here's Roger Joes. He's a wildlife biologist with the Forest Service on the Kaibab National Forest. And Roger's using a soil auger to test for clay. Now, we found it possible to build vernal ponds in the Southwest without using liners, providing the texture of the soil is high in clay and the clay is compacted under optimum moisture content conditions. Now, it's critical importance when building vernal pools without using liners in the Southwest that you place at least 24 inches of compacted clay over the entire wetland basin. And in this photo, we're using a wheel loader to compact the clay in 6-inch lifts. And the dozer operator is spreading the clay that has suitable moisture content for compaction in the basin. So you must have suitable moisture content in the clay soils to compact it. Now, look at the pine trees growing in the background. This indicates that we won't have to add water to the wetland artificially, that there should be enough snowmelt and rainfall to fill the wetland naturally. This photo, you'll see one of the wetlands that we built for the northern leopard frog on the Kaibab National Forest in Arizona. And we built this from soil on site that was high in clay, and water is only added to this wetland naturally from snowmelt and rainfall. Here's another vernal pool that we built on the Kaibab National Forest in Arizona for the northern leopard frog. And this wetland fills naturally with snowmelt and the monsoonal rains they get during the summer. And we built this pond by first removing and saving the topsoil, excavating the basin, spreading 6-inch thick layers in the basin of clay, and compacting each layer of clay until the total thickness of clay in the basin was 24 inches. Finally, we spread the topsoil over the surface of the compacted clay and returned large woody debris. Here's another wetland we built on soil that was high in clay on the Kaibab National Forest. Now notice the pine trees in this photo. Again, they give you an idea that there's enough precipitation that if you find a site that has soils high in clay and compact that soil under the right moisture condition, that the wetland should fill naturally with snowmelt. And this wetland is being used by the northern leopard frog on the Kaibab National Forest. Okay, one more species we're going to look at, the California red-legged frog. Few people have seen this frog. This is a federally listed threatened species in California, and it's most successful breeding in wetlands that do not contain bass, do not contain sunfish, and do not contain the American bullfrog, all non-native species. I like to show ditches in my presentation, and this is a ditch whose origin was hydraulic mining for gold in the 1850s. And we're finding that there are very few wetlands on the national forests in California. And the reason for this is often due to the gold mining activities in the 1800s. The hydraulic mining that took place filled these wetlands with sediment, and also it drained many of the wetlands with ditches and head cuts that formed. So when you visit the national forest, you find very few, if any, wetlands at higher elevations. And also you find that the valleys where the wetlands naturally occurred are occupied by lots of people living in very expensive homes, and very few, unfortunately, want wetlands. And there's so many roads that we're looking at, where are we going to build these wetlands? Well, they need to be built on higher ground that's in public land ownership. This is a team that we formed in 2014. Jan Williams is on the left. She's a fisheries biologist for the El Dorado National Forest. And this was a partnership with Save the Frogs and other organizations to design and build the first wetlands for the California red-legged frog in the Sierra Nevadas. What do we look for to build these wetlands? We look for canopy gaps in the forest. We look for level ground with slopes less than 6%. And we wanted to find open areas that were at least 40 feet in diameter. So what we found is with our soil testing that all the soils that we tested on these sites were sandy loam. We couldn't make these hold water without a liner, and there was no groundwater present. So we used aquatic safe liners to build these wetlands on the El Dorado National Forest. And here's an excavator that's beginning to build a wetland in one of these canopy gaps. Many volunteers help us with these wetland projects. And here volunteers are helping us to place an aquatic safe liner in the depression that was dug by the excavator. And we're going to protect this liner on both sides with geotextile before covering with soil. Here we're using a skid steer to move soil to the excavator. The excavator then covers the wetland with the liner with this soil. And we don't place any heavy equipment on the liner. We seeded the soils with native species of plants, and we use straw for mulch to control erosion. And here volunteers and agency people are revegetating a road that we use to access one of the vernal pool construction sites. The roadbed was prepared for planting using the rough and loosen technique that eliminates all compacted soils and really promotes the growth of vegetation. We placed large and small woody debris in and around the completed vernal pools to give the California red-legged frog places to hide. Look at the abundance of large woody debris we placed in this wetland that we built using a liner. And another reason for placing all this woody debris was to keep people with all-terrain vehicles from entering and destroying the vernal pools. The vernal pools filled with water. Now, this is a big deal because there were many naysayers coming into this project. They did not believe that the vernal pools would fill with water because of the drought conditions in California. Again, look at the presence of trees around this vernal pool. If we see trees growing like this, generally there's enough snowmelt and enough rainfall to fill your vernal pool in the spring. The wetlands are now being naturally supplied with precipitation and snowmelt. And the California red-legged frog is breeding in these constructed vernal pools, which is pretty exciting. A few years later, we built 2 vernal pools on Bureau of Land Management lands near the community of Michigan Bluff on the Tahoe National Forest in California. And this is a photo from a game camera that we set up near one of the wetlands, and it captured a mountain lion visiting the site. What's interesting is 5 minutes before this photo was taken, we have another photo showing a deer passing by and catching a drink out of the vernal pool. Here's one of the vernal pools we built on BLM land, and these are being used by the California red-legged frog. Now, this month and last month, April and May 2021, we built 18 ephemeral wetlands on the Tahoe National Forest in California to provide breeding habitat for the California red-legged frog. This was the largest project of its kind in the Sierra Nevada mountains. We had over 100 individuals helping with the project and learning how to build wetlands for listed species. And the project took place over a 3-week period. Here's one of the volunteers showing off a house that she built near the edge of one of the wetlands. The house is for the California red-legged frog, and it gives them a safe place to get into that's nice and moist. So in summary, vernal pools are being constructed across North America, and many of these are being designed to provide breeding habitat for rare species of amphibians. And if you're interested in gaining help with designing and building vernal pools for rare species, please contact me. Email is the best way. And I'd like to tour many states every year and help dedicated individuals to restore these wetlands. And if you're building vernal pools, that's fantastic. I encourage you to continue doing this. And I look forward to seeing the vernal pools that you're building. Thank you, everybody, for your attention.
Thanks, Thomas. That was a great presentation. We have a few questions that have been shared in the chat box. So we'll touch on those quickly. Emily asks, is your team concerned with geotextile plastics leaching into the water and disrupting the water chemistry, hormones, and potentially impacting the fertility of your target species? Or is the risk low due to the depth at which the geotextile is buried?
That's a really good question. There are 2 manufacturers of aquatic safe liners and geotextile in North America, and we only purchase from these manufacturers, and the materials are tested to be fish grade and aquatic safe. And I've been working with these companies for quite a few years now, and they are on the watch to make sure that these materials are safe for the environment. And the companies that I work with, one is Fab Seal Industrial Liners, the other is DAC Manufacturing, and they provide these materials, they test them, they certify that they are aquatic safe. So yes, this is a big concern. I don't recommend buying these liner materials locally because most are treated with chemicals and most contain impurities, and you wouldn't want to use them in building wetlands.
Great, that's a relief to hear that. Some other questions about the liners. How long are they expected to last? And do tree roots break the aquatic safe liners?
Well, that's a good question. Would everybody be happy if these liners lasted 5 years? I don't think so. 10 years. How about 10 years? I'll talk to a group and a government people and say, is it okay that your wetland only lasts 20 years? And they say, no, we want these wetlands to last forever. So the first liners that were ever used were used at a landfill in Oklahoma in 1944. They dug up one of the liners a couple of years ago, and they found it's perfectly preserved. If we take aquatic safe liners made out of PVC or EPDM, and we protect them on both sides with thick layers of fabric, and we cover these with at least 6 inches of soil, and then we place water over them, I think it's safe to say that these wetlands will last forever. The first wetland I ever built with a liner was in 1988 at Tilden Hogg Elementary School in Rowan County, Kentucky. I look at the wetland every year. It's in perfect condition. It's full of aquatic life. So, we can take material. When I'm building wetlands out of clay soils, oftentimes I'll unearth materials that have been buried for 10,000 years. I think these wetlands we're building will last a long time. Now, I encourage you to test for clay soils and to look for groundwater, because building with liners is a lot of work, but it does allow you to build a wetland where you don't have clay and where you don't have the groundwater being present.
Great. So you kind of just touched on the next question regarding the advantage to using those liners as opposed to leaving it as subsoil. You need it when the soil isn't clay. Do you also find that it helps in inhibiting possible cattail or reed canary seeds that are currently a source in the soil?
What really helps to control cattails is that your wetland dries and really bakes in the summer. What I found is that if the soils remain saturated in your wetlands in sunlight, then cattails can come in and take over. But when you look at natural vernal pools and vernal pools that we've built that don't have cattails, they have something in common. They dry and they bake, and the cattail doesn't like that. So I think one of the best ways to reduce cattail invasion, as well as reed canary grass, is to build your wetland so that it has a varied bottom. It has pits and mounds. And then also consider shading it with trees. And if you see a cattail show up in the first couple of years, I suggest removing it. Even though cattails are so important to so many different wildlife species, they are quite aggressive. And if you can control those cattails for the first year or two, that gives sedges and rushes and other plants time to colonize and grow before the cattails can take over.
Okay, very good. And last question we'll answer here. It says, more of a personal question. What drove your passion to get into restoring vernal pools?
Oh, that's a really good one there. I was working for the U.S. Forest Service on the Superior National Forest, and there was a ridge overlooking Lake Superior, and every spring I would drive that ridge and I would hear all these frogs and toads calling. But then you come by in the summer and the wetlands would all be dry. And none of us recognized the importance of vernal pools until we started doing some investigating. We found out that these temporary pools of water are of huge importance to such a diversity of animals and plants. And that got me thinking, it's okay to build a wetland that doesn't hold water all year. And if we do build a wetland that doesn't hold water all year, more than likely, we're going to see greater waterfall use. And of course, amphibians and reptiles and all the crustaceans will really use it. So thank you.
Very good. And Tom, I encourage you to check out the chat. And there are some really encouraging comments here about how you're living the dream, doing awesome, inspiring work, and also some comments that people will probably reach out to you in the future. So thank you so much for your time, and we look forward to seeing you in person 2022.
Likewise. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yes, thank you. And then now Dale will switch us over to the field videos of vernal pools here in Ohio. So check it out.
Hello everyone! Lauren and Liz here for the very last 2021 Vernal Poolooza workshop. We wanted to give you one last peek at the virtual field trip sites. So let's get started!
To recap, the first vernal pool is located at Gallant Woods Park in Delaware, Ohio. Walk through the gateway and turn to the right to find the habitat. Read the interpretation signs along the way and explore whenever the park is open. Our May visit revealed an explosion of green. Once visible from the trail, the pool is now hiding amongst all the plant life. The water level has receded, showing the leaf litter covered ground. The remaining water has become a nursery for so many animals. Damselfly larvae were in abundance, young crayfish were found, and we're even lucky enough to find a salamander nymph. Throughout the seasons, this pool has shown us the importance of this unique place in nature.
As the weather begins to warm and the likelihood for rainfall decreases, the water in the Orndorff wetland has significantly receded. The surrounding trees and shrubs have fully leafed out. Within the vernal pool, sedges and buttonbush are beginning to thrive. Among the decaying logs in the vernal pool lies various species of fungi, including orange mycena, oyster mushroom, and the hexagonal pored polypore. Alongside the edge of the vernal pool, we were greeted by a black and gold flat millipede and a juvenile gray rat snake. Amongst the animal life living in the water, we found a crayfish and a female green frog who wasn't too keen on hanging out with us for too long. Within a pocket of the pool, well over 100 wood frog tadpoles were found.
Hi everybody, we're here at Calamus Swamp. I'm Jenna.
And I'm Logan.
And we're happy to walk you around to show you how Calamus is doing this May.
So let's go.
Hi everybody, we're here at Calamus Swamp.
Today
I'm
is
Jenna.
May
And I'm
13th.
Logan.
And we're
It's
happy to
almost
walk
60
you around
degrees,
to
really
show
sunny,
you how Calamus is
And we're
doing
checking
this
out
May.
this prairie
go.
right here when you come in.
Hi everybody.
So Logan, tell us what we're looking at.
Swamp. I'm
Today
So
is
Jenna.
what
May
you're
And I'm
15th.
seeing
here
We're
is
happy to walk
ashy
you around to
sunflower.
show you
one of the
how
ways you
Calamus
can
is
really
we're
tell
checking
some
out
of the
this
remnant
prairie.
stalks
Go.
here. And it's got almost that ashy look to it. It looks almost whitish gray. Has a lot of fuzz to it as well.
Awesome. We have some pokeweed here. It has this reddish stem. And what did you find over here, Logan?
So what we have over here is yellow water buttercup. It's also known as Ranunculus flavularis. And it's an aquatic submerged plant, but it can also be terrestrial, which is what we're finding here near the vernal pool. And the leaf structure of these plants is kind of unique. It almost kind of gives off that coral-like appearance to it. Typically they're divided into 3 segments, so you got 1, 2, and 3. So yeah, just another neat little find that we found out here at the vernal pool.
Here we have butterweed blooming.
Yeah, so this is native to central and southeastern North America. You'll see them a lot along like old ag fields and woodland edges as well.
So we're just walking down the trail along the edge of the wetland. It is just bursting with the butterweed and a lot of vegetation throughout. So we'll check and see how much standing water is back here today.
So here we have what's called swamp dock, and it's one of 3 species that we have here in Ohio. It's known by Rumex verticillatus. The other 2 docks that we have in Ohio is called Rumex crispus, and that is curly dock. And the leaves on curly dock will be almost pinched in like this.
Like it's rolled
Yeah,
together.
like it's rolled together, exactly. And then the other dock species that we have here in Ohio is called Rumex obtusifolia, which is our broadleaf dock. And the leaf structure on that dock species is much more oval and larger in shape than some of these more elongated leaves that we have here.
Awesome. And we're finding this in a few inches of standing water, but we also found it near the vernal pool edge over by the trail where there was no water at all. So it has a bit of a range.
So this here is a native vine that we have here in Ohio called moonseed, and it'll have black berries as it matures throughout the year. It's a climbing vine, so it can grow up onto trees or shrubs or other plants.
So we found salamanders right here, tiger salamanders, this February, right in this little woody pocket. Now it's filling in with a lot of vegetation. We have a Carolina wren coming to check us out. There it is.
Oh, that's sweet.
This little warbler is black with an orange wing. We'll have to look it up later. So this is a Baltimore oriole. You can see the silhouette of up in the tree. We have a honeybee here. So this honeybee, they actually have hairs on their eyes. So if you look at them very up close or even under a microscope, you can see those hairy eyes. This is probably Apis mellifera. And it's already seeking out these little flowers here on the black snake root.
So this is another fleabane you'll find here in Ohio called Erigeron philadelphicum, which is the Philadelphia fleabane. And as you can see right now, we have numerous little pollinator species trying to get on these flowers.
Yeah, they're moving so fast and they are so tiny.
Oh, there's one right there.
We're getting some regrowth of button bush here. These stems sticking out, and soon they'll be as tall as these shrubs. Also quite a bit of duckweed on the surface of the water. You can hear a green frog sounding like a banjo. And every once in a while you'll see one pop out of the water. So we just saw a green heron fly away as we're approaching the end of the dock here. And we hear another one clucking from the button bush. And we have some spatterdock growing. Have a couple flowers getting ready to bloom. Spatterdock can form these dense patches. It grows from its rhizomes and spreads pretty easily, so while it's a native plant, sometimes you have to manage, otherwise it may take over this whole area. Here we have a green frog tadpole. These spots are pretty diffuse on the edges. And he's also growing his hind legs. This specimen's pretty large. Just found it right here in the spatterdock. Here's some of the contents that we just scooped up. We have a tiny tadpole here. It's a bit iridescent. It might be a wood frog tadpole. And there's some tiny little zooplankton and some mites swimming around. Here's a very tiny little water strider climbing on the edge of the tray. We didn't find any fairy shrimp today, but there are some. This is a chronomid blood midge. A couple other horsehair worms. That blood midge, called a blood midge because of the red color. It's filled with hemoglobin. And over here, we have an oligochaete and some mites swimming around in the water too. Here's a small little dragonfly nymph. Here we have a Physidae snail, maybe feeding off the bottom of the tray. Wow, these are pretty active today. Really get a good view of the mouth parts. The radula, scraping mouth part. A little ditiscid beetle. These are predaceous, and this is the larva. Well, that finishes up our Vernal Poolooza field session. Be sure to check out the Vernal Poolooza 2022 coming this spring.
We'll see you there.
Thanks. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Feel free to reach out to us if you have any other questions. Otherwise, thanks for all of your time and go enjoy the wetlands this weekend.